Hey Tony, it's Tuesday, and first I have to answer your question of the week. I don't really get to go to the game store enough to be a usual. Like a couple of them, know me kind of by name and face, but I don't get to go there enough to really have too much of an interaction with a lot of the people who run the shops. I certainly am part of a small group who plays Legion and things like that, but nah, I'm not really. I wouldn't call myself a usual. So I'm actually outside today because the weather is finally really, really nice, and which is nice because it's been a little dicey for 6 months. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but New England winters can be a little bit rough. And we certainly had like our false spring a couple weeks ago, but then we had snow like a week and a half ago. So you know, weather in New England is made up, and it doesn't matter because the weather will do what it wants to do. So what I'll talk about this week is I actually don't have I don't really have like a big topic to talk about, but I do kind of want to talk about managing expectations and how some companies are able to do it and some aren't. So obviously, you know, AMG just had their big April update they've been promised for a long time, released the last bit of the cards and things like that. However, I and a lot of other people were actually really kind of upset. Upset's not the right term, but really disappointed with what we ended up getting because there were no points increases. But there are a couple of units that are really dominating that people don't super have fun going against. Plus, there were a lot of cards that a lot of people liked, or units a lot of people liked that they got rid of. And I think AMG tried their best to manage expectations. They kind of were like, oh, we don't have any any big things going on. They did like the interview circuit before the release. But I still feel like it was a bit of a failure in public relations in a sense, because this was the big the game's complete now, and I think it was just it didn't feel like they wanted to make any adventurous decisions, which I'm not going to determine one way or another as far as what economical decisions you should make, but I really think that they could have done better to actually do a little bit more than they did. A lot of the units. Now they have their 5 big unit reworks that were pretty substantial. Callus is a completely different character now. Lando is completely different. Jen is very different, but also pretty similar in some ways, meaning in the sense of her command cards. But they had promised all these big changes, and it just didn't feel like they had it. Now, obviously, I'm a clone player, so I can't really speak on disappointment that the Empire players felt or anything like that, because that's not the world that I play in. However, I definitely think losing units like the Pathfinders, the Royal Guard, and especially Palpatine. I mean, Palpatine is an iconic character. Now I'm sure there were some Lucasfilm issues as to why what they can continue with Palpatine, or some design concepts in which Legion is a miniature game and Palpatine kind of was a board game unit in a sense. What I mean by that is a lot of what he can do was not generally what Legion is, and is more if I'm playing a board game, isometric board game when there's asymmetric board game where there's one stronger player and other weaker players. Palpatine kind of was that stronger player. He was too expensive, he didn't really do a lot in that sense, but a lot of his command cards, a lot of his abilities were very board gamey that I can understand not super working within the Legion context, but I still feel really bad for Empire players who lost units that they spent money on, spent time building and painting. I'm hoping that they can kind of bring them back in some sense, but I think that was a real disappointment. And then me as a clone player, losing some cards that I really liked hurt, and seeing some things that didn't really change. Rex is a really good support commander, but he's really only good for like one thing, and he really could have used maybe like a slight upgrade to his cards, and that just didn't happen. And I think AMG kind of failed in the sense of, first off, they weren't willing to take a bigger risk than they did. Which, like the big announcement was like, okay, we're completing 2.6. Everything is now out there. You can play now. And I really think there's not a better time, in my opinion, to jump in and maybe like make a more substantial change. But I'm not the one who controls that. It was just like, I thought that like they tried to do their media tour beforehand to basically like go have like, oh, there are not gonna be any big changes. But I feel like the players, were like, oh, is this going to change? Didn't really go with like big changes, and I think that AMG just kind of dropped the ball in that sense. Now again, I love AMG. I love their roadmap. I think Legion is in really good hands, but I don't think you can look at this and say this wasn't a disappointment in the big announcement of, oh, we're finishing up the game. You can all play now. But that was just my opinion. Tony, my question for you is, what was your opinion of the release? Do you think they should have gone further? Do you think they went too far in some senses? Tony, I'll see you on Friday. Later, bro.